What happens when someone you quietly love is reduced to a spectacle in a room that prides itself on refinement? Naomi Reyes had always understood her role in Avery Lennox's orbit, efficient and visible, a shadow that kept everything running without ever drawing attention. That illusion shattered the moment a polished dining room decided she didn't belong within it. The evening had been planned with clinical precision. A business dinner, potential investors, nothing more. Naomi would arrive early, sit apart, observe, document, disappear. It was a rhythm she had perfected over countless nights spent orbiting Avery's world without ever stepping into it. Professional distance wasn't just expected, it was necessary. But beneath that discipline lived something far less controlled. The restaurant doors gleamed beneath Boston's evening glow, reflecting a version of Naomi that suddenly felt inadequate. Her black dress, chosen for its simplicity, now seemed like a quiet admission of everything she wasn't. Not powerful, not striking, not the kind of woman who stood beside someone like Avery Lennox and belonged there. Avery was a force, sharp, composed, untouchable, a woman who built empires from nothing and walked into rooms as if she owned the air itself. Naomi, in contrast, managed calendars and stole glances she pretended didn't matter. Inside, the illusion of elegance sharpened into something colder. The host's smile carried a polish that cracked the moment he looked at her too closely. His eyes assessed, dismissed, decided. The reservation existed, but somehow she did not fit inside it. Every word he chose was careful, indirect, impossible to challenge, and yet unmistakable. The suggestion that she might be more comfortable elsewhere landed like a quiet insult wrapped in courtesy. The glance shared with his colleague said the rest. Naomi felt the heat rise not from embarrassment, but from recognition. This wasn't confusion. This was judgment, a quiet sorting of who was worthy of space and who was not. She held her ground with what dignity she could gather, refusing to give them the reaction they seemed to expect. Still, the damage settled under her skin, sharp and lingering. Not because of what they said, but because of what they believed. She chose silence, not for herself, but for Avery, because making a scene would mean pulling Avery into it, staining a carefully constructed evening with something ugly. And Avery deserved better than that, she always had. So Naomi stepped aside, took a seat, and tried to shrink back into the role she knew best, unseen, unaffected, untouched. But some things refused to stay hidden. When Avery walked in, the entire room shifted. Conversations softened, attention redirected, the atmosphere bending instinctively around her presence. She moved with the same quiet authority that had built her empire, every detail of her composed, deliberate. And yet, the moment her eyes found Naomi, something changed. It was subtle at first, a flicker of concern, a pause that didn't belong. Then came the realization, the tension, the unmistakable awareness that something had gone wrong in the space between Naomi's arrival and her own. Avery didn't ask immediately. She observed, calculated, read the room with the precision of someone who missed nothing. The staff, suddenly attentive, rushed forward with rehearsed charm, eager to correct their earlier indifference. But Avery wasn't interested in their performance. Her focus remained fixed on Naomi, and on the discomfort she hadn't tried hard enough to hide. When she finally spoke, her tone carried a quiet edge, controlled, measured, dangerous in a way only those who knew her well would recognize. The question she asked was simple: whether Naomi had been taken care of. But beneath it lay something else entirely, a warning. Their answer came wrapped in politeness, but the cracks were already showing. The explanation didn't quite hold. The smiles felt too tight. The confidence from earlier had begun to unravel. Naomi could have ended it there, could have brushed it aside, protected the evening, preserved the illusion. Instead, she stood. Her voice remained steady, even as everything inside her stirred. She chose her words carefully, offering just enough truth to expose what had been implied without turning it into something louder, and that was all Avery needed. Understanding came quickly. Naomi watched it unfold in real time, the shift in posture, the sharpening of focus. The way Avery stepped forward and claimed the space with quiet authority. What followed wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Avery dismantled the situation piece by piece, her words precise, leaving no room for evasion. Every polite excuse was turned back on itself, every implication dragged into the open where it could no longer hide behind courtesy. The staff faltered, their confidence collapsed under the weight of being seen too clearly, and Naomi stood there, caught between dread and something far more dangerous. Because this wasn't just about a restaurant anymore. It was about the way Avery looked at her, not as an assistant, not as someone replaceable or peripheral, but as someone worth defending, worth standing up for, worth disrupting an entire evening for. That realization settled deep, unsettling everything Naomi thought she understood about their relationship. She had spent so long convincing herself that what she felt was one-sided, safely contained, impossible to act on. But watching Avery now, calm, unyielding, fiercely protective, made that belief impossible to hold on to. Something unspoken had surfaced, and once something like that is seen, it can't be unseen. Avery's voice sliced cleanly through the man's carefully rehearsed politeness, stripping it down to what it really was. From where she stood, there was no ambiguity, no room left for soft phrasing or polite deflection. What she saw was simple and unacceptable. Her assistant had been made to feel small, unwelcome, diminished in a place that claimed refinement. The shift in the room was immediate. Confidence faltered. Smiles tightened. The blonde hostess cast a quick, uncertain glance toward the back, as if searching for someone to take control of a situation already slipping through her fingers. Her suggestion came out rushed, fragile, an attempt to rewind what had already happened, to reset the narrative before it collapsed completely. An offer of their finest table, extended too late to feel generous. Avery repeated the words, but the way she said them transformed their meaning. Not a polite acceptance, not even curiosity, something heavier, deliberate. The implication settled into the air with unmistakable weight. Not two separate people, not employer and subordinate, a single unit. What touched one reached the other. The tone carried something unmistakable, not just authority but possession. Protection that went beyond obligation and into something far more personal. It echoed louder than anything said outright, and it didn't go unnoticed. The hostess's composure cracked, her earlier superiority dissolving into visible unease. An attempt was made to recover, to reframe Naomi as something smaller, easier to dismiss. An employee. A label meant to simplify, to reduce, to contain. The word lingered with a quiet insult, flattening everything into something clinical and impersonal. Avery's reaction was subtle, but it landed hard. A tightening jaw. A stillness that signaled a decision had already been made. In that instant, it became clear that the situation was no longer salvageable in the way the staff hoped. Something irreversible was about to unfold. When Avery spoke again, her voice had softened into something deceptively calm, the kind of calm that precedes impact. She stepped closer, closing the distance between herself and Naomi until the space between them disappeared entirely. The faint, woodsy trace of her perfume lingered in the air, grounding and disorienting all at once. Then came the touch. Her hand found Naomi's with quiet certainty, fingers threading together as though they had always belonged that way. Warm, steady, unyielding, the world narrowed to that single point of contact, to the sudden, undeniable reality of it. Her gaze never left the hostess. The correction came not as an explanation, but as a declaration. Naomi was not something to be categorized and dismissed, not something peripheral, not just an employee. The room seemed to hold its breath. Avery's other hand settled at the small of Naomi's back, drawing her closer with a familiarity that felt instinctive, effortless, protective without hesitation, intimate without permission. And then she said it, wife. The word landed like a struck bell, ringing through the space with a clarity that couldn't be softened or taken back. It reshaped everything in an instant, rewrote the narrative, repositioned Naomi from someone barely tolerated to someone untouchable. The silence that followed pressed in from all sides. Naomi felt it everywhere, in the sudden weakness in her knees, in the rush of heat beneath her skin, in the way her breath refused to come steadily. Her entire body reacted to the claim, to the ease with which Avery had spoken it, as if it were already true. As if it had always been true. Every nerve sharpened under the warmth of Avery's hand, under the steady presence at her back. The scent of her perfume wrapped around her like something protective, something solid enough to lean into if she allowed herself. Across from them the hostess unraveled, words failed, composure dissolved, her colleague stood frozen, the polished facade replaced with something stiff and uncertain. Other staff hovered nearby, drawn in by the shift in atmosphere, pretending distraction while listening to every word. The question that followed was quiet, but it carried force. There was no room left for evasion now, no safe middle ground to retreat to. Denial came quickly, tangled in panic. Assurances of inclusivity spilled out, rehearsed and hollow, collapsing under their own weight. Because moments earlier, concern had not been about inclusion. It had been about appearance, about fitting an unspoken standard. Avery didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her response moved like silk wrapped around steel, exposing the contradiction with precise clarity. The illusion shattered completely when the manager appeared, drawn in by the tension like gravity. His polished demeanor couldn't quite hide the urgency beneath it. Apologies came fast, layered and formal, his attention shifting rapidly as he took in the scene, the joined hands, the proximity, the unmistakable alignment between them. His recalculations were visible. Power had shifted, and he knew it. He addressed Naomi directly then, a marked change from before, though even that stumbled. The correction of her name came automatically, grounding her in herself even as everything else felt unreal. The apology deepened. The tone sharpened into something careful, deferential. Promises of respect followed, reinforced with a glance toward his staff that carried quiet reprimand. Then came the offer. A private room, complimentary, an attempt to contain the damage, to restore balance in the only way they could still manage. Avery didn't answer immediately. She observed, measured, let the weight of the moment settle fully before deciding what came next. When she finally turned, the shift in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. Part performance, part something far more personal. The endearment she used flowed effortlessly, as if it had lived on her tongue long before this moment. It sent Naomi's thoughts scattering. Words became difficult to form, her composure hanging by a thread as she met those steady gray eyes. Whatever answers she gave came from instinct rather than clarity, offered with just enough steadiness to hold itself together. Something flickered across Avery's face in response. Recognition. Perhaps even realization. Her grip tightened slightly, grounding them both. For a brief moment, the layers between them thinned. The roles they had maintained, assistant and employer, fell away just enough to reveal something real beneath. Something that had been building quietly, patiently, waiting for a moment like this to surface. When Avery spoke again, her voice softened, but its authority remained intact. The decision was made, the private room would suffice. But the boundary had been redrawn. Naomi was not to be treated as anything less than Avery herself. The statement was clear, deliberate, reinforced with that same word, wife, spoken again with growing ease, as if she were testing its shape and finding it fit. Understanding came quickly this time. Agreement followed without hesitation. With that, the moment closed. They moved through the restaurant together, no longer separate figures maintaining distance, but something visibly connected. Avery's hand remained firmly in Naomi's, her hold steady, almost protective in its persistence. Eyes followed them as they passed, some curious, some knowing, all aware that something significant had just unfolded. In the reflection of polished glass, Naomi caught a glimpse of them side by side. Avery composed and commanding, herself, still the same, and yet not. Something had shifted. They looked like they belonged together. And what unsettled her most was not the act, not the performance, not even the word that still echoed in her mind. It was how natural it felt. Inside the private room, the world narrowed again. The door closed, sealing them off from the noise, from the scrutiny, from everything that had just happened. Silence settled between them, heavy and full. Avery's hand lingered a moment longer before slipping away, the absence of it immediate and sharp. She spoke Naomi's name, and everything in that single word felt different now, closer, heavier with meaning. Naomi moved quickly to safer ground, reaching for the structure they both understood, the one thing that had always kept everything else contained: business, investors, the familiar script. Because stepping beyond that now felt like stepping into something far more dangerous. They'll be here soon. The words felt thin the moment they left me, a fragile attempt to restore order where none remained. When I lifted my gaze to hers, whatever structure I had been clinging to began to fracture. There was something in Avery's expression, something unguarded, unfinished, that told me she wasn't done. Not even close. My investors can wait. The finality in her voice settled into the room like a sealed door, closing off every argument before it could form. She turned toward the window, the city stretching out beyond her in glittering lines of light along the harbor. From where I stood, she looked exactly as she always did, composed, commanding, carved from certainty. But her reflection betrayed her. In the glass I saw the vulnerability she never allowed anyone else to witness. It flickered there, quiet but undeniable. I remained where I was, rooted to the floor, my hands still alive with the memory of hers. Everything had shifted too quickly, 30 seconds of fire and defiance, a single word that refused to stop echoing. Wife. It had rewritten something fundamental, something I hadn't been brave enough to name. You didn't have to do that. My voice barely carried. I could have handled it. She turned back to me, and the sight of her unraveled something deep in my chest. The impenetrable composure was gone. The distance she wore like armor had cracked, and through it came something raw, something real enough to take my breath with it. Could you have? Her voice was quieter now, but it held weight. Because it looked like they were trying to humiliate you for something as meaningless as where you come from. There was pain in it, sharp, personal, far older than the evening we stood in. It reached beyond the restaurant, beyond the moment, into every quiet instance where I had been overlooked, dismissed, placed neatly beneath someone else. She had seen it. All of it. She stepped closer, closing the distance until I had no choice but to meet her eyes. What I see when I look at you isn't what they see. Her voice softened, but it didn't lose its intensity. It's not what anyone else sees. My heartbeat turned restless, pressing hard against my ribs, as if it had been waiting for this moment without my permission. She didn't look away. I see the person who remembers I can't stand lilies because they remind me of loss, so you fill my office with roses instead. I see someone who knows when the pressure gets too much and keeps medicine ready before I even ask. I see the only person who can make me laugh in a room full of people trying too hard. Each word struck with quiet precision, dismantling the careful distance I had built over 2 years. Every defense, every rationalization, every quiet insistence that what I felt was one-sided began to give way. Her voice lowered, losing the last of its restraint. I see the woman I've been falling in love with while pretending it was something else. The air between us changed, charged with something irreversible. There was no retreat left in that moment, no safe place to step back into. The truth had been spoken and it refused to be contained. The question slipped out before I could stop it, fragile and exposed. You love me. The answer came without hesitation, though it seemed to cost her something to say it aloud. Yes. There was no embellishment, no attempt to soften it. Just truth, steady and unflinching. She spoke again, and this time it wasn't about the moment. It was about everything she had noticed, everything she had felt, everything she had kept hidden. The way I brought order to chaos. The way I challenged her when no one else would. The way I understood her beyond titles and expectations. Her hand lifted to my face, her touch careful, almost uncertain, as if she were afraid I might disappear. I love that you see me as a person, not just the role I play. My eyes closed without thought, leaning into her touch like something instinctive. The fear I had carried for so long, the certainty that I had imagined everything, began to unravel. I thought I was making it all up, I admitted, my voice unsteady. The way you look at me, the way you stand too close, the way your hand lingers. A faint smile touched her lips, soft and knowing. You noticed. I notice everything about you. The confession felt like stepping into open air, leaving nothing behind to hide in. I told her the things I had memorized without meaning to, the small habits, the quiet contradictions, the details no one else seemed to see. Her thumb brushed against my lip, and the simple contact sent a quiet shiver through me. You know me better than anyone, she said, and you're afraid people only see what you've built. I answered softly. Not who you are. You think you have to keep proving yourself even now? Something shifted in her expression then, something deeper than surprise. A barrier I hadn't even realized existed began to fall away. Her question came gently, but it carried insistence. And you? The answer sat heavy in my chest, waiting. I'm afraid that if I let myself love you the way I wanna, you'll wake up and realize I was never what you needed. That this is just convenience. Or loneliness, something temporary. Her hands framed my face, steadying me, grounding me. Look at me, I did. Really looked. Not at the woman the world saw, but at the one standing in front of me now, open, unguarded, real. I don't confuse gratitude with love, she said quietly. I don't mistake convenience for something this strong. And I'm not alone when you're with me. Before doubt could find its way back in, before I could retreat into the safety of hesitation, she closed the distance. The kiss was gentle, deliberate, leaving space for me to pull away. I didn't. Everything I had held back surged forward at once, my hands gripping the fabric of her suit as if anchoring myself to something I had always believed was out of reach. It felt impossible and inevitable all at once, like stepping into a life I had only ever imagined. When we parted, we stayed close, breaths mingling, the moment stretching between us. I reached for practicality again, for something solid to hold on to. Your investors? They can be rescheduled? Her answer came without hesitation. This matters more. The weight of her words settled over me, equal parts grounding and overwhelming. What happens now? Her lips brushed mine again, softer this time but no less certain. Now we stop pretending, no more distance, no more hiding what this is. There was no illusion in her voice, no hesitation, only clarity. Tomorrow, things will still be what they are on paper, she continued. But you won't just be my assistant. You'll be the person I choose, if that's what you want too. The choice had been waiting for me long before this moment. It had lived in every glance, every quiet second, every feeling I had tried to deny. Yes, I said softly. That's what I want. The knock at the door broke through the moment, pulling reality back in with it. Avery stepped away, but her gaze held mine, steady and unchanged. The server entered with quiet professionalism, setting the table as if nothing had shifted at all. Avery spoke first, calm and decisive. The meeting would be postponed. Something more important had come up. Her eyes met mine as she said it, and the meaning settled deep. When the door closed again, reality pressed in harder this time. You can't just cancel everything, I said, the weight of consequence rising fast. For you I can. For the woman you love, I corrected quietly, though doubt lingered beneath the words. For someone who could complicate everything you've built. This isn't a calculation, she cut in, her voice sharp now. Don't turn it into one. But the fears wouldn't quiet, they had lived in me too long. What about what people will say? The assumptions, the reasons they'll invent for everything I've achieved. Let them talk. The certainty in her voice was unshaken, and that was the difference between us. For her, the world was something to confront. For me, it was something that had always found ways to push back. You're the CEO? I said, the words heavier than I intended, edged with something bitter and unshakable. I'm the one they'll reduce to a rumor. The one they'll say traded everything for proximity to you. The silence that followed felt toxic, thick with everything I hadn't meant to wound her with, and everything that still lingered between us anyway. I watched the shift happen in real time. Hurt flickered first, sharp and immediate, then anger, rising fast, and finally something colder settled in, something controlled and dangerous. Her voice cut through the space with quiet precision. Is that what you think this is? The accusation wasn't loud, but it landed hard. That I'm taking advantage of you? The words hit like a shock. No, that's not what I meant. My response came too quickly, too desperate to undo what had already been said. Her gaze didn't soften. Then what did you mean? There was no anger in it now, just something steady and demanding. Because it sounds like you think I don't understand the difference between love and something temporary. Or worse, that I would risk everything I've built for something shallow. The weight of it pressed down on me, unbearable. I sank into the chair, the fragile dream we had just stepped into collapsing under the reality I couldn't ignore. I think you're used to getting what you want, I admitted, forcing the truth out even as it hurt. And I think I've wanted you for so long that I don't trust this to be real. I don't trust that I didn't imagine it into existence. The fight left her then, as suddenly as it had risen. The tension drained from her shoulders, replaced by something quieter, more human. She moved to sit across from me, reaching forward, her hands finding mine again, gentle, steady, grounding. "Look at me," she said softly. "Please." I did, even though it meant facing the pain I had put in her eyes. "I've built my entire life on careful decisions," she said. "I don't act without understanding the consequences. I don't gamble with things that matter." Her grip tightened slightly, not forceful, just certain. "Do you really believe I would throw everything away for something fleeting?" I hesitated, choosing my words with care. "I think powerful people can mistake wanting something for needing it," I said quietly, "and I think loneliness can blur the line between appreciation and loved." She let the words settle, her thumbs tracing slow, absent patterns across my knuckles as she thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "You're right." The agreement landed like a drop into empty space, pulling something in my chest down with it. "There are risks," she continued. "Complications? People will talk, and not kindly." I tried to pull my hands away, instinctively retreating from what felt like confirmation of my fears. She didn't let me go. "But that's not the whole truth." Her voice shifted, quieter now, but more certain. "I've been alone for a long time." The admission came without pretense. "I've had relationships that made sense. People who fit the expectations, who understood the world I live in. And none of them ever made me feel what I feel when you laugh at something I say." Her gaze held mine unwavering. "I've been grateful to many people," she went on. "I've rewarded hard work, supported careers, done everything a leader is supposed to do." Her expression softened, something almost vulnerable breaking through again. "But I've never lost track of a conversation because I was distracted by someone's presence. I've never felt my heart shift just because someone walked into a room." Each word dismantled the logic I had been hiding behind, piece by piece. "The imbalance will always exist in one sense," she said. "Professionally, I'll still be your boss. That doesn't change overnight. But outside of that," her voice steadied, "we're just two people who found something real." Fear rose again, sharp and immediate. "And if it doesn't work?" The question came out before I could stop it. "If we try this and it ruins everything, the job, the trust, everything we've built?" Her answer came just as quickly. "And if we don't try," she countered. "If we spend years wondering what we walked away from? If I have to watch you leave one day because staying close becomes too hard? Or watch you choose someone else because I never had the courage to be honest?" The thought hit deeper than I expected. The idea of leaving her, of replacing what I felt with something lesser, felt impossible. "I'm scared," I admitted. "So am I." That stopped me. Her fear didn't look like mine, but it was just as real. "I'm afraid I'll ruin this," she said quietly. "That the way I am, the intensity, the expectations, the life I lead, will push you away. That one day you'll decide you deserve something simpler. Someone who can give you a life that isn't complicated by everything I carry with me." I studied her then, really studied her, seeing past the authority and certainty she showed the world. "What do you actually want?" I asked softly. If none of the consequences mattered, her answer came without hesitation. "I want to take you home and talk until morning," she said. "I want to know everything about you, not in pieces, not in stolen moments. I want to stop holding back. I want this to be real, openly, completely." The honesty in it cracked something open in me, warmth and fear rushing in at once. Her gaze softened as she looked back at me. "And you?" I held her eyes, seeing not just the risk, but the possibility waiting behind it. "I want to stop being afraid of wanting something that matters this much." A small smile broke across her face then, real and unguarded, changing everything about the way she looked. "Then we do this together?" she said. The agreement felt fragile and powerful all at once. "Okay." The words settled between us, tentative but full of meaning. Her smile deepened, as if she needed to hear it again to believe it. "Okay," she repeated. The shift that followed was almost instinctive. Even in the middle of something life-altering, her mind moved toward structure, toward clarity. "What does that look like?" It was such a familiar question, so entirely her, that it pulled a quiet smile from me despite everything. "It means honesty," I said slowly. "About what we feel, what we're afraid of, what we can and can't handle." She nodded, absorbing it like a plan already forming in her mind, and accepting that this won't be simple, I continued. "People will have opinions. Your world, my world, they'll collide. Let them," she said immediately, that same protective edge returning. "Anyone who has something to say can say it to me." I hesitated, then forced the next part out. "And at work." That gave her pause, not uncertainty, calculation. "Care. We handle it properly," she said after a moment. "Transparency. Structure. No room for doubt or accusation. Everything clear, documented, above question." It wasn't a reaction, it was preparation. "You've thought about this before?" I said quietly. Her expression shifted, something softer returning. "I've thought about you," she admitted. "About what this would mean if I ever let myself say it out loud." There was something almost disarming in that honesty. She reached for my hand again, her touch grounding, familiar now in a way it hadn't been before. "Since early on," she added, a faint smile touching her lips. "Long before tonight." A quiet warmth spread through me, cutting through the fear. The conversation drifted briefly into safer territory, work, capability, the roles we played so well. It was easier there, easier to speak in logic instead of feeling. But the shift didn't last. Avery, I said, pulling us back. What scares you the most about this? She went still, her fingers tightening slightly around mine. Losing you. The answer came without hesitation. In any way, you've become essential to my life. More than I realized until I imagined what it would feel like if you weren't in it. I felt the weight of that settle deep. You're not gonna lose me. Her gaze held mine, steady but not entirely convinced. People change, she said quietly. They decide they want something different. And for the first time, it wasn't just my fear filling the space between us. They meet someone who can give them the life I can't. Her voice dropped so low it almost disappeared into the space between us. Something easier, quieter, a relationship that doesn't come with scrutiny, or headlines, or the constant weight of my world pressing in. The words settled heavily, each one shaped by a fear she rarely allowed to surface. Someone who isn't always working, who doesn't carry enemies or expectations that could spill over and touch you. I held her gaze, steady despite everything. I don't want easy, I said softly. I want you. Exactly as you are. The truth of it felt solid, unshakable. I've watched you handle things most people would crumble under. I've seen you stand your ground when everyone else stepped back. Nothing about your life has ever been simple, and that's never been what drew me to you. Her expression shifted, something uncertain easing just slightly. Gossip doesn't scare me. Opinions from strangers don't define anything real. What matters is what exists here between us, Don. Relief flickered across her face, followed by something softer. When you say it like that, she murmured, it almost feels possible. It is possible, I said, but only if we stop expecting it to fall apart before it even begins. She lifted our joined hands, pressing a quiet kiss against my knuckles. The gesture carried warmth, but also something grounding, something that felt like a promise taking shape. I love you, she said, the words careful, as if she was still learning how to say them out loud. Not a title, not a role, me, Naomi. The way she said my name held more meaning than anything else. I love you too. The answer came easily, naturally, like it had been waiting for permission to exist. Not the woman she was in boardrooms or headlines, just Avery. She stood then, moving around the table until she was beside me. When she reached for my hand, I didn't hesitate. I let her pull me up, the closeness between us no longer something to avoid. The question of what came next lingered, softer now, no longer edged with uncertainty but with quiet anticipation. Staying there meant explanations, tension, the remnants of everything that had already gone wrong. Leaving meant something else entirely. A beginning. I chose the latter without needing to say much. Hours later, the world felt smaller, quieter, reduced to the space we shared on her couch. The city stretched endlessly beyond the windows, lights scattered across the harbor, but none of it held my attention the way she did. There was ease between us now, a softness that hadn't existed before. She leaned back, stealing food from my container with a casual familiarity that made something warm settle in my chest. I thought you'd think I was crossing a line, she admitted. That everything about this would feel wrong to you. I turned toward her, giving her my full attention. I was afraid you'd wake up and realize I was just convenient, I said. That what you felt wasn't real, that it was just timing or loneliness, or something that would fade once you stepped back. My hand rested lightly against her, the contact still new enough to feel like something fragile and precious. I've loved you for longer than I wanted to admit, I added quietly. The confession didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt freeing. She looked at me with something like surprise, then understanding. The memory surfaced easily. The moment everything had shifted without me fully realizing it. The first time she stood up for me when it would have been easier not to. The first time she made it clear that my voice mattered. That had been the beginning. She laughed softly at the memory, but there was something deeper beneath it. You've been doing the same for me, she said, in ways I didn't fully see until now. The late nights, the small gestures, the quiet ways we had taken care of each other without naming it. It hadn't just been duty, it had been something else all along. Nothing about that was just work, she added gently. That was you choosing me every day. The realization settled in slowly, reshaping everything that had come before. We've been here for a long time, I said. She nodded. The difference now is that we're finally honest about it. She leaned closer, her touch unhurried, her presence steady. The space between us no longer felt uncertain, it felt intentional. When her lips met mine again, it carried something new. Not urgency, not hesitation, something patient, something real. When we pulled back, the quiet returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't needed to say. Reality found its way back in eventually, as it always did. Work structure, the world outside this moment. Monday would come, and with it expectations. But nothing about that felt as overwhelming as it had before. We would step back into our roles, handle what needed to be handled, maintain what had to remain steady, and beyond that, there would be something else. Something ours, dinner after long days. Conversations that stretched late into the night. Moments that no longer had to be hidden or explained away. She laughed again at something small, something unimportant, and it filled the room in a way that made everything else fade. I told her what I had always seen in her, the strength, the quiet kindness, the parts of her that most people overlooked. She listened, really listened, the way she always did when something mattered. "You notice everything," she said softly. "I notice you." The difference settled between us, simple and undeniable. She kissed me again, deeper this time, and it felt like stepping into something I had spent too long convincing myself wasn't possible. When she pulled back, her eyes held something unguarded, something certain. "I love you," she said again, quieter now but stronger. "Not because it's easy, not because it makes sense, because you see me for who I am and you stay." And this time, there was no fear left in the silence that followed. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear tucked behind the promise. "Not unless you ask me to." Her response came immediately, fierce and unyielding, as if the very idea of losing me was something she refused to entertain. "Never." The word settled deep, carrying certainty instead of doubt. "I want you here, for as long as you choose to stay." Beyond the glass, the city shimmered under the night sky, lights scattered like possibilities waiting to be claimed. Inside, none of that mattered. The world had narrowed to the quiet space between us, to the warmth of her arms, to the steady rhythm of something finally real. We stayed there, wrapped in each other, letting conversation unfold without urgency. Stories slipped out easily, memories, dreams, fragments of ourselves we had never dared to share before. Time stretched, softened, lost its edges as the darkness outside slowly gave way to the faintest hint of morning. When sleep finally found me, it came gently, her presence anchoring me in a way I had never known. Her fingers traced slow, absent patterns along my back, grounding, reassuring as if she needed the contact as much as I did. For the first time, there was no uncertainty, no second guessing, just the quiet, overwhelming certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The woman who had once claimed me in a moment of defiance had become something far deeper, someone who chose me with intention, with clarity, with a love that didn't waver. And in that choice, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I felt worthy of being chosen. Months later, I stood in the same place where everything had begun, but the memory of that night felt distant, almost unreal. The tension, the humiliation, the sharp edge of it all had been replaced by something steadier. The space itself hadn't changed. We had. The people who worked there now carried themselves differently. There was respect in the way they moved, in the way they spoke, not just toward us but toward everyone. The quiet imbalance that once lingered in the air was gone, and still, there were moments that felt unfamiliar. The way I was addressed, the subtle shift in how I was seen. The ring on my hand caught the light with every movement, a small, constant reminder of how much had changed in such a short time. The proposal had been simple, unexpected in the best way. No grand stage, no audience, just a quiet moment that belonged entirely to us. It had felt right exactly in the way everything between us had begun to feel. Now, sitting across from her, I watched that same familiar expression play across her face, the one that still made my chest tighten no matter how often I saw it. There was excitement in me, something I could barely contain. My hands betrayed it, unsteady as I passed the envelope across the table. She opened it, her attention sharpening as she read. The shift came slowly, curiosity giving way to surprise, then something deeper. "Pride? You did this on your own." There was something in her voice, something almost reverent. I nodded, unable to hide the excitement anymore. I needed to know I could. Not because I doubted her support, because I needed to believe it for myself. Her gaze softened, something like understanding settling in. "You've never needed to prove anything." But she didn't stop there. "What made you decide now?" The answer came easily. "Because I don't want to stand beside you as someone who depends on you. I want to stand beside you as someone who builds with you. I want to meet you at your level, not just support it." She went quiet, taking that in, seeing not just the decision but everything behind it. The ambition, the determination, the future I was reaching toward. "You thought this through," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "I've had a good example." Her hand found mine again, that familiar warmth grounding everything. There was no hesitation in her response this time, no doubt, only pride. The kind that didn't diminish me, didn't overshadow, didn't claim ownership. It stood beside me. We lifted our glasses together, the moment simple but meaningful in a way that didn't need embellishment. I looked around the room then, letting the past brush against the present just long enough to recognize the distance between them. That night had been the beginning, even if it hadn't looked like one at the time. Not because of what happened, because of what it revealed. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet certainty. "That moment wasn't just reaction," she said. "It was truth even before I was ready to admit it." I felt it settle over me again, that same warmth, that same clarity. We had been moving toward each other long before either of us found the courage to say it out loud. Everything else had simply caught up. By the time we stepped back out into the night, hands intertwined, the feeling had returned, that quiet sense of rightness that followed us now. Wherever we went, a name spoken differently. A future that no longer felt distant. As the city moved around us, as life continued in all its noise and motion, something inside me remained still. Certain. The journey behind us felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. Every step had required something: trust, courage, the willingness to believe in something that didn't come easily. And now, standing where we were, none of it felt wasted. Hum no longer existed in a place, it existed in her. In the space we created together. In the life we were building without apology, without fear. What had once been dismissed had become something undeniable. What had once been fragile had become something strong enough to hold everything we were. And this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning that finally felt like it belonged to us.